Chapter 19. What Nightmares Dream of. The tall, spacious hallways of Canterlot Castle surrounded Twilight, bathed in the light of the early afternoon sun, allowed entrance by the many vast windows that lined the walls. Truly representative of the high status and power the nation had accumulated over the years. With shining marble floors, high pillars of beautifully carved white stone, and luscious red carpentry with golden trim. Every window was home to a breathtaking view of Canterlot itself, alongside the rest of the landscape far beyond the mountain the city resided on. More than capable of inspiring the artistic talents of all who would come to the glorious city that sat as Equestria's crown jewel. It was magnificent, to say the very least. Twilight slowly strode through these wondrous walkways, half out of spite and half out of curiosity. In spite of everything, the young alicorn had never been given the chance to explore the castle on her own. She had always been taken down the most direct paths towards whatever her destination was meant to be. The dining hall, her personal quarters, her classroom, and the throne room. But there was so much more to this place than she had ever seen. She had been kept from entire wings of the castle, them being of no concern to her, they all said. But today was different. Today, Twilight had had enough and wanted something to do to distract her from the admittedly awful day she was having. A quiet stroll through the castle seemed like a good idea. Of course, facts always tend to outweigh fiction, and her peaceful, self-guided tour was not as peaceful as she had anticipated. Every time Twilight passed by one of the castle's many guards, she was subject to a bitter moment's glance. Not a single guard attempted to stop her, as she technically wasn't trespassing, but the way they all stared was telling enough. These looks lasted only for a second or two, but it was easy to see they were off-put by her. After all, an alicorn of her age was something unheard of before Twilight came along. It only made sense, but as she continued on her way, she started to suspect that it wasn't just her status as an alicorn that was putting them off. And that realization only served to further amplify her bad mood. But then, a voice. Someone had just called out her name and was making no effort to hide just how upset they were with her. Twilight sighed, recognizing both the tone and the voice, and stopped walking. She didn't bother turning to face them. She already knew exactly who was standing behind her. Her overbearing and overprotective older sister, just as agitated as ever from the sounds of it. Twilight sighed in anticipation of the dreadful conversation that was to follow.
There you are!
Her sister spoke sternly at Twilight's back.
You cannot just up and abandon your studies like that! Your professor has been searching high and low for you! Humorous. Normally he is doing all he can do to look away from me.
Twilight murmured back, recalling the less than pleasant series of events that had led up to her midday stroll.
Now he wishes to know of my whereabouts? Forgive me, sister, if I laugh at his hypocrisy. Ha ha ha.
The fake laugh was the last thing Twilight contributed to the conversation before walking away. Or at least, before she tried to walk away. Alas, she felt something grab hold of her tail, keeping her from advancing. Though that didn't stop her from trying, creating the admittedly funny side of her walking in place.
You should not walk away from your elders when they're talking to you,
the older sibling continued. She began applying more force to her magic, drawing Twilight in closer, much to the younger pony's dismay.
Especially your sister. But our conversation is over. You want me to go back to class, and I refuse. The debate has come to a close.
Twilight doubled her efforts in trying to escape the superior magical grasp, only to cause herself a great deal of pain from pulling at her tail so hard. so she stopped attempting to escape, prompting the release of her tail. Even still, she did not look back.
This is not up for debate. You are an alicorn, a very young one at that. Your magic is far more potent than that of a unicorn's. You need to learn how to properly control it so you don't hurt some pony. Or yourself.
There was something in those last two words that resonated with Twilight. It was faint but noticeable underneath the overbearing and unpleased tone. There was some legitimate concern for the younger alicorn's safety. Of course, Twilight didn't really care about that at the moment.
Then why are you and Mother unable to teach me?
Twilight pleaded back, practically begging at this point.
If alicorn magic is so volatile, then surely a unicorn should not be qualified to teach an alicorn how to use it. Starswirl the Bearded is one of the most accomplished sorcerers of our time, perhaps even in the whole world.
Twilight didn't need to look behind her to see her sister's brow furrowing. She could practically feel her gaze bearing down on her.
From personal experience, I can assure you that he's more than qualified for the task. Yes, from your personal experience,
Twilight hissed.
But in mine, he's a bitter old bastard who absolutely despises me for no reason I can be blamed for.
The older sister gasped in shock.
Excuse me? You are an 8-year-old filly. How do you think Mother would feel if she heard you talking like that?
Twilight donned an unseen, mischievous smile.
Who do you think taught me to talk like that?
There was a long pause in the conversation, one that let Twilight know that she had gained the upper hoof in this sibling argument. She did all she could to stop herself from laughing, otherwise her ruse would be revealed for what it really was. Of course their mother didn't teach Twilight to talk like that. She was only 8 years old, for crying out loud. But the swiftness in which she had spoken was enough to have fooled her older sister, much to her own delight.
All right. I will play your game. Why does your teacher hate you so?
The question was one Twilight didn't expect to hear. Not from her sister, at the very least. She'd been caught off guard by the inquiry and hesitated for a moment. She knew exactly why and how her professor disliked her, but putting it into words was a more difficult task than she anticipated. She spent some time thinking it over, but soon decided that the simple approach would be best. Her sister was a busy pony, who knew how long it would take before she would be on her way. Taking a deep breath, Twilight simply raised a single wing, still not looking back to face her elder sister.
Care to hazard a guess?
Once more, silence engulfed the two. There was a moment where Twilight believed that her sister had up and left before even hearing her out, something that wouldn't have surprised her. And she almost didn't want to look. Instead, she just wanted to walk away and pretend like she had been heard out. But a heartfelt sigh from behind her was enough indication that she wasn't alone. Further proof of this came from the glittering golden light that surrounded her, and soon Twilight was forced to turn and face her elder sister. Her coat was whiter even than snow, and accented heavily by the golden regalia that decorated her body. Her mane and tail, ever flowing like their mother's, were both comprised of beautiful hues of glowing, fiery colors, reminiscent of the sun she had been named for. The second alicorn was still young, but she was well on the path to adulthood at this point. Even now in her adolescence, she would be taller than most fully grown ponies. So when compared to Twilight's stature, she came across as a giant. She was magnificent, in every sense of the word. Twilight had seen her many times throughout her short life. Her sister was known far and wide across all of Equestria and beyond, and her name would likely live on for thousands of years to come. Princess Sanctus Solus Celestia II. But as the older alicorn kneeled to look Twilight in the eyes with her own of royal violet hue, Twilight could see great emotional turmoil upon her sister's face. At first, Twilight thought that she was upset with her, but that thought was eradicated as she was pulled into a tight embrace. The size disparity between the two caused Twilight to practically vanish from the world in the larger pony's embrace.
Mother is busy with her court at the moment, but I will see to it that she is made aware of your concerns.
Celestia spoke softly as she pulled away from the hug.
You may go about your business. Just try not to get into trouble.
Nothing else was said, as Celestia simply turned and walked away. As Twilight watched the heir to the throne make her leave, she was left in a dumbfounded state. She couldn't find the words to explain what exactly just happened, and she tried as hard as she could to recall a time when her sister had ever listened to her like that without some huge argument between the two. And there was none. She tried to recall a time when her sister had looked to be in such great turmoil, and there was none.
What in the world just happened?
Twilight asked herself in her confused state, though her attempts at solving the mystery were interrupted by a slight sniffling sound off to her right. Looking over, she saw one of the many royal guards watching her. The stallion's eyes were beginning to water, looking as if he was on the verge of sobbing. Frustrated by this, Twilight barked at him.
What are you looking at?
Nothing, Your Highness. His expression and demeanor were quickly replaced by the typical stone-faced look the guards always had.
Damn right.
Days began to blend into weeks, which soon faded into months and even years. Twilight's days were spent as a young princess, and a young alicorn should have been spending them. Her studies were her life, more often than not, even after her initial teacher had moved on to pursue other goals. Every subject was touched upon, from the most basic control of mystical energies to the most complex of transfiguration and conjurations. Even divinity was touched upon, something Twilight found herself to be decent at best. Magic was not her only subject, oh no. As a princess, she was also required to learn of Equestria's many laws and appropriate social customs, which were just as complicated and equally strenuous as trying to bend the forces of reality to your whims with a glowing horn. But as she began to mature and blossom, she found her interests did not align with the arcane arts or the political world. Every day on her various paths throughout the castle, she would see numerous members of the royal guard on their own routes and routines, training their bodies and wills, ready to defend Equestria at a moment's notice with their very lives. While the work of the royals and the nobles were invaluable to the survival of the nation, it was these brave mares and stallions who would be the ones to keep the populace safe in times of strife and war. Thus, her mind was made up, her path was set, her destiny in her own hooves from now on. And on this day, her 16th birthday, she was finally ready to enact on this decision. Finishing up her daily duties and studies, Twilight made her way down to the castle barracks, to the private office of the captain of the guard, where she would take the first step to define the rest of her immortal life. You can't be serious, the guard captain asked with a cocked eyebrow, gazing upon the younger pony's ever-eager expression. A tall, powerfully built earth pony stallion. He was currently without his enchanted armor, leaving him with a dark gray coat and a lighter gray mane, colors very reminiscent of powerful metals. He was a seasoned soldier who worked hard to protect country and crown, a pony Twilight admired despite scantly knowing him.
I am most serious, Captain Ironoath,
Twilight responded with the same enthusiastic grin.
And today is my 16th. The age in which ponies may be legally drafted into military service should the need arise, or enlist should they choose to do so. And I choose to do so.
Iron Oath continued to stare blankly at one of the royal alicorns he was pledged to protect. Despite her claims, he couldn't tell if this was some sort of joke or not. He looked around his sparsely decorated office space with weary eyes. A feeling deep in his gut told him that she wasn't serious about this, that it was just some royal prank that any moment the other sister would come popping in from nowhere to laugh at whatever it was the joke was meant to be. But that never came, and Twilight was the only pony sitting in front of him. I mean no disrespect when I say this, Your Highness, but I don't think you're applicable for a spot in the royal military.
Why would I not be? I am in top physical condition, I am sound of mind and soul, and I am fairly certain that I can pass the background check. If I cannot, then I'll have to speak with Mother about lowering the standards.
That's not exactly what I meant.
Then what did you mean?
Twilight's pressing eyes upon him was enough to make Iron Oath shudder. He might have outclassed this mare in terms of physical ability and size, but she dwarfed him in every other category. She had authority over him, she had unfathomable magic prowess over him, and she had a direct line of communication to the two other ponies in the world with that kind of overwhelming advantage. She could very easily just order him to comply with her request, and that would be the end of it. But she wasn't. And the confusion that brought the stallion was enormous and never-ending. Well, you're a princess. You aren't meant to be fighting wars or catching common crooks. Well... He gulped heavily. It just isn't your place. Twilight sat there for a moment, her friendly smile fading into a stern glare, enough to send another shudder down the soldier's spine. Her eyes pierced through him like spears, and she thought heavily on his words. For a brief moment, Iron Oath thought he might have convinced her to leave, but then she spoke up again.
And what exactly is my place?
Iron couldn't finish the thought. He was far too intimidated by the 16-year-old mare sitting in front of him to properly form words. Sweat began to build up above his brow, and his eyes began to dilate and twitch. His breath was coming faster, so much so as to risk his oxygen intake entirely. And he was trying to hide all of this from the princess sitting just on the other side of his desk. Seeing that he had no answer to give, Twilight went to finish her thought.
I am not heir to the throne, Captain. That right is reserved for my elder sister, as I'm sure you are well aware. And she has fully embraced her duty and her destiny to lead our people into further greatness. As for me, I have decided that if it is my sister's fate to lead this land, then it shall be mine to protect it. Would you rather I spend my days pining over a throne that is not mine to have?
I actually didn't know your sister was the heir. Iron's dull face was painted with a shade of pink synonymous with embarrassment. I just assumed that your mother would rule forever, or that you and your sister would, I don't know, take shifts or something? I don't know. Much like Twilight, it seemed the political world was not on this Earth Pony's list of high priorities. Yet unlike her, he was not tasked with learning the inner workings of said political world.
Fanciful ideas, Captain, but unfortunately, the real world cannot always accommodate such ideas. The real world can be a dark and unforgiving place, and we need brave ponies to protect those who cannot protect themselves.
A confident smile found its way onto Twilight's lips.
And who better than an alicorn to be the one to protect them?
Well, the stallion couldn't argue with her on that front. Her status as an alicorn alone made Twilight more capable than any other recruit right out of the gate. He pondered for a time on the princess's request, before finally continuing. Very well. But don't expect special treatment because you're a princess. You want to be in the military? Fine, you got it, and everything that comes with it. Twilight smiled brightly.
Oh, Captain. On the contrary, I expect nothing less than to be put through the ringer, as they say. Do your worst. I will overcome.
All right. But if I hear anything from the Queen, then you're...
You just leave that to me.
Twilight's family wasn't exactly thrilled to hear that she had joined the Equestrian Royal Military under their noses. She had spent months attempting to talk the two into letting her pursue her desires, but they hadn't been as easy to sway as Captain Iron Oath, much to her dismay. But in time, she was finally able to get them to understand that this was what she wanted to do with her life. And thus, the youngest Alicorn was able to begin her training in earnest. And the following 6 years had done wonders for her physical condition and her social life. At first, the other recruits and guards were weary around her, being an Alicorn princess and all. But she was able to get them to open up to her in time. And while she chose to spend most of her off hours in the barracks, wanting to live the full experience, she allowed herself the luxury of returning to her high societal ways of life for 1 week every 6 months. To see her family, to catch up on her academic and arcane studies, and to tell no end of stories about all the friends she had made amongst the common folk, to her sister and her mother. She might have accidentally gotten a few ponies promoted by doing that, but she didn't mind. If anything, she was happy that her comrades had gotten to advance in the ranks. They didn't need to know that she had any involvement in these progressions. Of course, everything changed one day when Twilight returned to the upper levels of the castle, only to learn that it was finally time. Her mother was ready to pass on the mantle of queen down to her elder sister, an announcement that shook the whole of Equestria. The queen had been the nation's only leader since the country had been established. It only made sense that the citizens would be wary. It seemed that ruling a kingdom for 426 years was all she could take, and wished to pass on the throne to the next in succession. The month before the coronation was a bizarre one. Twilight was asked to put her military duties on hold for the time being to help in the preparations, a request she complied with without hesitation. This was to be a momentous occasion in equestrian history. She wanted to make sure that it went off without a hitch. She had found that her sister had her own sensitive anxieties and fears about all of this as well, and had not been informed of her ascension until the day of the public announcement. Their mother had always been one to wait until the last moment to do things. She was always one for dramatic flair. Finally, the day had come for the official ceremony. Twilight had spent the past several hours in her room preparing for the event. She was still a princess after all, and was obligated to be there front and center with the rest of her royal family. Despite this, her mother absolutely insisted that she wear her armor to the occasion, as opposed to any regalia or gowns to the event, much to the dismay of several counselors and hired event planners. Twilight herself even objected to this, until her mother informed her that she wished for the people to see her as she wanted to be seen, as a powerful guardian to the people. And so, Twilight stood before the full-sized mirror within her chambers, taking one last moment to tidy up any unsightly details that might have remained. And staring back at her from the other side of the glass was the same pony she had known her whole life. With a coat made of a stunning shade of dark cobalt and a mane of brilliant ivory strands, almost aglow like pale moonlight. Normally tied to keep it out of her eyes, today it was worn down in a manner more befitting of a princess. And while she vastly preferred the former style, she could definitely appreciate the way her mane framed her face. It didn't dance and wave about as her mother and sisters did, but that was something she was glad for, considering all the horror stories the two had told her of those unruly manes. Her eyes were of a magnificent silvery teal hue, a trait she had only seen in herself thus far in her life. Her eyes trailed down towards the suit of armor she was wearing, custom built for her natural height difference and regal status. She had requested to have armor identical to that of her fellow soldiers, but it seemed the blacksmith still felt the need to add some bravado to show that she was indeed a member of the royal household. A bright silver-colored set of plate mail with very minor highlights of gold inlay and an intricate carving of a crescent moon upon the chest. It at least matched the traditional uniform and coloration, in addition to the gold highlights, but it was far more detailed, far more elaborate. It was still perfectly functional, which was the only reason Twilight had accepted the set in the first place, but still, she longed for something less conspicuous. She already stood out enough as it was. And with that train of thought, her eyes fell upon the features that distinguished her from all other ponies in Equestria. Her gorgeous teal eyes had an almost cat-like allure to them, with tall, narrow pupils as opposed to the round ones that her kin had. The horn on her head was not a straight, narrowed cone, but more of an upwardly curved wedge of some kind. The princess had been told that there were unicorns with horns such as these in Ciara, but she had yet to ever meet such a pony. She flicked her ears, watching the tufts of fur at their tips wobble and bounce slightly. And then there were her wings, large and bat-like in appearance, and easily the most eye-catching aspect of her form. All features befitting of the world's only Saurosian alicorn.